All right, welcome to week 12 class. We are going to be talking about chapter 9 today. But before we do, just a couple things. One, you're probably recognizing a different background than you're usually used to. That's because I'm here in North Carolina this weekend visiting family. And so keep that in mind. If you have any questions that you need to reach out or want to reach out and give me a call about, just bear in mind that you don't need to worry about the time change. I won't be on West Coast time this weekend until Tuesday. So other than that, we have this week not only chapter 9, but we have the chapter 9 exam. I know I got a couple questions on citations this last week, so I figure if a couple people are wondering, then might as well talk to the whole class about that real quickly. The questions involved in-text citations versus the reference list. So let me try to break that down as quickly as I can and make it as simple for you. If you put a reference in your reference list, then it absolutely has to be referenced in the post. You can't just put something in the reference list that you don't talk about in your post. That doesn't count towards your citations. Merely putting a reference in there and not mentioning it anywhere in your post is not a reference at all. It's not a citation. And secondly, there has to be an in-text citation to tell me or any other reader where in your post or in your paper that you are referencing this material. So for instance, if you were going to reference this video today, so in your reference list, you're obviously going to put Bell, S 2021, and then the proper APA formatted citation for a YouTube video. But on top of that, if that goes in your reference list, then absolutely you have to put something in your post saying what I said, what it is that you're referencing of what I said. Either you're taking a quote from this video or you're saying, according to Bell, who said XYZ, and then you're going to expound upon that in your own words, or you're going to paraphrase something I said. Either way, something about what you're referencing has to be in your paper or in your post. And on top of that, in parenthesis, which is the actual in-text citation, in parenthesis, it has to say Bell, 2021. So if you have any citation in your reference list that is not in a parenthesis format inside your paper or your post, then that is not a reference. You're just listing it uselessly in your reference list. Everything in your reference list has to match a name. If there's a name in your reference list, there has to be a name in the post that matches that. If you put 3 or 4 different references in your reference list, there has to be at least 3 or 4 in-text citations in your paper or in your post that have those exact same names. And that's how you know you formatted it correctly. So you can't say, for instance, Bell, S in your reference list, and then speaking of that same video, you put YouTube as an in-text citation. Those 2 names have to match. So keep that in mind. I posted that at the beginning of the semester. There are plenty of APA references or APA materials to reference that I posted, and you can also research it. By all means, Google APA format. APA 7 is what we're using. Figure out and research how to use in-text citations, because a full reference, and remember there has to be at least two or more references to get full credit in your discussion posts. So you have to have at least 2 references in your reference list, and both of those references have to be mentioned somewhere in your post and have an in-text citation there. So keep that in mind. So I hope that I made that as simple as possible. And as we go forward, number one, I'm going to expect that in your discussion posts, but we have a paper coming up and there's going to be reference requirements in that paper. And I want to make sure you get full credit by using the references in the paper. Moving on to chapter 9. Last week, in chapter 8, we talked about utilitarianism. And remember, the real simple way of describing utilitarianism is any decision you make is not necessarily, the components of that decision are neither moral or immoral. It's the result of that decision that determines whether or not that decision was moral or ethical. The end justifies the means was the simple way of saying that. So this week, we are going to talk about deontology, which is essentially the opposite of utilitarianism. Deontology talks about how the way you make the decision, the components of your decision, are what determines whether or not your decision is ethical, regardless of the outcome of the decision. So to understand the difference between utilitarianism and deontology, we need to understand the difference between hypothetical imperatives and categorical imperatives. Those are how we describe utilitarianism versus deontology. So hypothetical imperatives are simply broken down as if-then equations, if-then decisions. So if I don't want to get a ticket, then I won't speed. If I want to get a good grade, then I'm going to study. So your decisions, what helps you make a decision on what to do or what not to do is that end result. If I want that good grade, then I'm going to study. If I want to avoid a ticket, then I'm not going to speed. That's your hypothetical imperative. Now take that the contrary to hypothetical imperatives are categorical imperatives. And that doesn't matter at all what the end result is. So if you take that same speeding scenario, then it doesn't matter whether or not I want a ticket. I know that speeding is wrong, so I'm not going to speed. That's a categorical imperative. It doesn't matter if there's a relationship towards the end result or a ticket or somebody gets hurt or it's dangerous to others. I know that speeding is wrong, so I'm not going to speed. Just categorically wrong. So any decision you make where the decision itself is based on a categorical wrongness or immorality, then that's a categorical imperative. And that's the difference that's how we understand the difference between utilitarianism and deontology. So kind of applying deontology, which is broken down into just three different categories, which is Kantian ethics, prima facie duties, and rights-based duties. So those are the three types of deontology. The book gave us an example, and I'll break it down real quickly. The book gave us an example that they used to apply deontology, and that was you have a man sitting on a porch, and there's a woman who runs up to the man, and she's screaming, saying, help me, there's somebody trying to kill me, there's somebody trying to stab me, don't tell him where I am, I'm gonna hide in those bushes. And then she runs to those bushes and hides. Shortly thereafter, a man comes up with a knife, as expected, and says, where's that woman? I'm trying to kill her. Now you have a decision, or the man on the porch has a decision. Does he lie to the person and say, I don't know where she is? Or does he tell the person where she is? And there's your ethical dilemma, as strange as it may seem. So the dilemma is, lying is inherently wrong, so should that person lie? Or should, helping somebody or facilitating somebody's murder is also inherently wrong, so should he tell the truth and then facilitate her murder? Obviously an extreme example, but that's how you break down the essence of deontology. The decisions that are being made. Which side are you going to fall on that ethical dilemma? So that's an interesting scenario that the book gave, but I want to give maybe a more personal touch to the scenario and give you an ethical dilemma that I was presented with. I know I already shared with you a couple times that I spent a lot of years of my career with LAPD either conducting undercover operations or supervising undercover operations. And I want to take us back to the very, very first undercover operation that I ever was involved with. And that was, there was a rash of bicycle thefts downtown. And we were assigned, myself and my team were assigned to ride bicycles into the downtown area and see if our bicycles got stolen. Very simple. We would just ride it into a high crime area. There'd be a surveillance team already set up in the area. We would have to find a way to drop it off. And in this case, I would go in where there were a lot of people, lean it against a pole or a light post or building, and just strike up a conversation. Say, hey, I'm waiting for my brother. He's late. He's supposed to pick up this bike. I'm supposed to give him this bike. I got to go to work. I don't have time to wait all day. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to leave it here. If you see my brother, let him know I left his bike here, and then I would walk away. A lot of times people would steal the bike, people would walk up, or the people that were in the area that heard that conversation realized that I was leaving the bike unsecure, and they would steal the bike and ride away, and they'd be arrested by the chase team that came in. Some of those cases went to court, and I'll share with you one of the lines of questioning that has stuck into my head to this day. The defense attorney had me on the stand under cross-examination, and one of the questions that he asked me was, do you have a brother? And no, I personally, if you draw a line between the real person, Stephen Bell, and the character that I would play in as an undercover operator, I don't have a brother. So he asked, so was that a lie? Yes, that was a lie. And then he asked, when you dropped off that bike, isn't it true you were already at work, acting in an undercover capacity? Were you really late for work, or were you at work? And I said, no, I was at work technically. I was just playing a role. So was that a lie? Yes, I had to say that was a lie. So at the end of that line of questioning, the defense attorney had a very simple summary question, and that was, Officer Bell, based on all these lies, you're a liar then, right? And that really stuck into my head. I mean, I was kind of stumped at that question, because I knew, as in that capacity, you are allowed to tell untruths, and you're allowed to lie to people based on an undercover role that you're playing. But to be called a liar on the stand based on those lies, it made me realize that there are different degrees of ethics and different degrees of morality. And sometimes, based on utilitarianism, sometimes the end justifies the means. And we're going to talk about that scenario. We're trying to apply that scenario to a couple of the categories of deontology and see where that rolls. So let's talk about the first one that I mentioned, Kantian ethics, or Kantian ethics. Those are based on a philosopher from the 1700s, Immanuel Kant, and he said that ethics are absolute. So regardless of why you are making this decision or what outcome you hope to achieve from this decision, if something is immoral, it is immoral, and you cannot do it if you want to make a moral decision. So when we talk about categorical imperatives versus hypothetical imperatives, if hypothetical imperatives were, as you remember, if I don't want a ticket, then I'm not going to speed. So if you're talking about Kantian ethics, you're saying, if you're trying to decide, if I want this good outcome, then I need to make this good decision. Or if I want this good outcome, then I need to possibly take a less than moral step to reach this higher moral result. I need to possibly lie to suspects and tell them I'm somebody who I'm not to achieve a felony arrest and reduce crime in the area, in that scenario with the undercover bicycle, or excuse me, in that undercover scenario with the stolen bicycles. So if Immanuel Kant says that ethics are absolute and you cannot violate an unethical, or you can't commit an unethical act for any reason, then he would say that undercover operations are absolutely immoral. You cannot lie to achieve a greater good for the people. Now, obviously, the police departments around the United States don't necessarily adhere to Kantian ethics, but it is part of deontology, and it's a category of that, or a subset of that theoretical framework of how we make decisions and ethical decision making that is important to know. So let's move on to the next category, and that's prima facie duties. So prima facie is it means on the face. So a lot of times you'll hear that applied to, you'll hear prima facie evidence. So evidence on the surface, or evidence on the face, or how it looks on the surface is what that term means. So on the surface duties, prima facie duties have scenarios where there are conflicting moral outcomes, just like the scenario that I gave you, just like the undercover operation where you have to lie to some people to achieve that greater good. So now you have conflicting moral outcomes, which is, if you're going to look at hypothetical imperatives versus categorical imperatives, it's a hypothetical. You're trying to get this outcome over here, so I'm going to make this decision that may be less than ethical to achieve a greater ethical good. So in that scenario, for any undercover operation, but the scenario that I gave us, then that would apply. It would say that, sure, you should tell a small lie to a suspect to set up a scenario or set up an operation so that you can possibly serve the greater good of the community and arrest a thief. One small decision to achieve a greater good is how we describe not only hypothetical imperatives, but also prima facie duties. You need to look at the list of which ethical dilemmas or which ethical scenarios will trump other ethical scenarios. So a small lie would be trumped by a felony arrest for grand larceny or grand theft. So perhaps then putting in that same scenario, we would try to decide which small ethical missteps are worth being trumped by larger ethical outcomes. So the example given in the book is if you are a prisoner of war and you know that you have state secrets, you have secrets that could save people from being hurt. Say you know the locations of military bases, things like that. And if you're being questioned by the enemy as to, hey, give us the information that we need. And if you refuse to give it to us, we're going to kill everybody else in this prisoner of war camp. Then you have that prima facie duty to categorize, to prioritize which deaths are more important than the other. And that's what we do on a smaller case with that undercover story. So I had to prioritize a small lie under the greater good of a thief being arrested. In the scenario of the prisoner of war, the prisoner who's being questioned has to prioritize which are a few deaths worth saving many, many lives. And that's how prima facie duties work. That's how that theory works. You compare that to the one we discussed a moment ago, Kantian ethics, where Immanuel Kant would say, no, if it's immoral, it's immoral. So if they're asking you to tell secrets to the enemy, that is absolutely immoral. I don't care who's going to suffer because you don't tell or who's going to suffer if you do tell. Telling it is immoral, and you cannot do it if you're going to stay or complete a moral decision. Moving on to the last category of deontology, and that is rights-based duties. So rights-based duties, you need to understand what a right is. We have several rights in the United States as residents of the United States. We have several rights, and rights essentially place limitations on the behavior of those who would take those rights away. So if we're discussing a moral decision and that decision is about a right that we are given, then there's no debate over the morality of that decision. So if you're going to make a decision as to whether or not to purchase a gun, is it moral or immoral to purchase a gun? Well, in this country, we have the absolute right, with a few exceptions, the absolute right to bear arms. So it cannot, according to this theory, rights-based duties, it cannot be immoral to make the decision to purchase and bear arms if that right is given to you. Well, in order to understand more about rights-based duties, we need to understand the two different kinds of rights. And those are natural rights versus legal rights. Natural rights are human rights, God-given, natural given rights to live free, the right to not be a victim of a crime, things like that. And legal rights are rights that, like in the United States, the right to bear arms, like I just mentioned, or the right not to self-incriminate, or you have the absolute right to file a complaint against a police officer you think has wronged you. You're given that right by law. But is that a natural right? Is that a God-given right? The right to not self-incriminate or the right to be able to file a complaint against an officer? Or, does everyone in the world who is sane still have that same right, understand that same right? Or are those just rights that are given to us because of our legal system? And that's what it is. Not every country, not every person in the world has the right to not self-incriminate themselves or to be able to file complaints, things like that. Those are our legal rights versus our natural rights. So you see the gravity in the difference there. So if we're going to apply these rights-based duties decision-making process, then you're going to say, regardless of whether or not it's a natural right or a legal right, if that right is given to you by the law or by God or nature, then any decision based on achieving that right has to be moral. So if, let's use the decision to file a complaint. If you're trying to make a moral or trying to have an ethical dilemma within yourself, should I feel like maybe I was wronged by this police officer, but I don't want to ruin their career. Is it really ethical to be so ticky-tack and call somebody's supervisor and complain about their demeanor, complain about some misconduct, or complain about a discourtesy, an issue of discourtesy, things like that? You think it's such a minor issue, and you're having trouble deciding within yourself, should I do it, should I not, is this right, is this wrong? Well, if you're going to adhere to the theory of rights-based duties, then you absolutely have the right. The law has given you the right. It's not a natural right, but it's a legal right. You have the you have the legal right to file a complaint against a police officer. And if you have that legal right, which you do, then it cannot be immoral for you to do anything to achieve that goal. So if you are debating within yourself to whether or not to file that complaint because you think it might be unethical to hurt the officer, in this theory, it's not. Not every theory is going to adhere to the same standards, but in this scenario, I use that as because not every country and not every person in the world has that same legal given right. And I like to use examples of legal rights that are sometimes small in usage. So let's apply that to the scenario that I gave about the undercover operations and the bicycle theft. Do I have the right as an undercover operator to lie to suspects when I'm working in that capacity? Absolutely. The law says I have that right. I'm able to do that. It's legal to do that. So if you take that piece of information and apply that to the rights-based duties theory that says that anything that I do that is in adherence to a right that I have cannot be immoral, then that theory says it is 100% not immoral to lie if I'm given the right to lie. So that's another way of looking at it. So that's kind of the bulk of chapter 9, what I wanted to go over tonight. If you have any questions, again, reach out to me. I'm looking forward to seeing your posts. And again, I'll be here in North Carolina until I fly out Monday back to Los Angeles, and then we'll have that same time zone issue. But until then, reach out to me. Bear in mind the citations issue that I talked about. I really want you guys to get full credit on not only your posts, but your paper that's coming up as well. I encourage you to start looking at the paper. I know I spoke about it a few weeks ago. It's imperative that you get a good score. I don't have my grade book in front of me, but I do know that the paper itself is a good percentage of your grade for the entire class. So a good score on that paper is crucial to getting a good score in this class. The final thing I want to mention is how important turning your assignments in on time, submitting your assignments on time is. There's a 10% penalty every time you submit a late assignment without reaching out to me first. So if you do that every week, then if you were going to get a B in this class, your grade has dropped down to a C. It's a substantial penalty, 10%. It may seem like a little bit at a time, but if you keep doing that, there's going to be a large penalty that is built up over the semester. And I don't want that to happen. So if you find yourself having trouble submitting your posts by Monday, remember every post is your primary posts, your initial posts are due on Monday. If you're having trouble, set an alarm, do something. If you have any challenges, reach out to me. If you have if we have a good talk and there's some rationale for why your post is going to be submitted late, then there won't be that penalty. But again, don't go to the well too often. At some point, the grace is going to run out. All right, I look forward to chatting with you again soon, and enjoy the rest of your week.